1, 2, 4 was spiteful, full of a baby's venom. The women in the house knew it, and so did the children. For years, each put up with the spite in his own way. But by 1873, Setha and her daughter, Denver, were its only victims. The grandmother, baby Suggs, was dead, and the sons, Howard and Bugler, had run away by the time they were 13 years old. As soon as merely looking in a mirror shattered it, that was the signal for Bugler. As soon as 2 tiny handprints appeared in the cake, that was it for Howard. Neither boy waited to see more. Another kettle full of chickpeas smoking in a heap on the floor. Soda crackers crumbled and strewn in a line next to the doorsill. Nor did they wait for one of the relief periods, the weeks, months even, when nothing was disturbed. No. Each one fled at once. The moment the house committed what was for him the one insult not to be borne or witnessed a second time. Within 2 months, in the dead of winter, leaving their grandmother, baby Suggs, Setha, their mother, and their little sister Denver, all by themselves in a gray and white house on Bluestone Road. It didn't have a number then, because Cincinnati didn't stretch that far. In fact, Ohio had been calling itself a state only 70 years when first one brother and then the next stuffed quilt packing into his hat, snatched up his shoes, and crept away from the lively spite the house felt for them. Baby Suggs didn't even raise her head. From her sickbed she heard them go, but that wasn't the reason she lay still. It was a wonder to her that her grandsons had taken so long to realize that every house wasn't like the one on Bluestone Road. Suspended between the nastiness of life and the meanness of the dead, she couldn't get interested in leaving life or living it, let alone the fright of 2 creeping off boys. Her past had been like her present, intolerable, and since she knew death was anything but forgetfulness, she used the little energy left her for pondering color. Would you bring a little lavender in if you got any? Pink, if you don't. And Setha would oblige her with anything from fabric to her own. Winter in Ohio was especially rough if you had an appetite for color. Sky provided the only drama, and counting on a Cincinnati horizon for life's principal joy was reckless indeed. So Setha and the girl Denver did what they could and what the house permitted for her. Together they waged a perfunctory battle against the outrageous behavior of that place, against turned over slop jars, smacks on the behind, and gusts of sour air. For they understood the source of the outrage as well as they knew the source of light. Baby Suggs died shortly after the brothers left, with no interest whatsoever in their leave-taking or hers, and right afterwards Setha and Denver decided to end the persecution by calling forth the ghost that tried them so. Perhaps a conversation, they thought, an exchange of views or something would help. So they held hands and said, "Come on, come on. You may as well just come on." The sideboard took a step forward, but nothing else did. "Grandma Baby must be stopping it," said Denver. She was 10 and still mad at Baby Suggs for dying. Setha opened her eyes. "I doubt that," she said. "Well, then why don't it come?" "You're forgetting how little it is," said her mother. "She wasn't even 2 years old when she died, too little to understand, too little to talk much even." "Maybe she don't want to understand," said Denver. "Maybe, but if she'd only come, I could make it clear to her." Setha released her daughter's hand, and together they pushed the sideboard back against the wall. Outside, a driver whipped his horse into the gallop, local people felt necessary when they passed 124. For a baby, she throws a powerful spell, said Denver. No more powerful than the way I loved her, Setha answered. And there it was again, the welcoming cool of unchiseled headstones, the one she selected to lean against on tiptoe, her knees wide open as any grave. Pink as a fingernail it was, and sprinkled with glittering chips. 10 minutes, he said. You got 10 minutes. I'll do it for free. 10 minutes for 7 letters. With another 10, could she have gotten dearly, too? She had not thought to ask him, and it bothered her still that it might have been possible that for 20 minutes, a half hour, say, she could have had the whole thing, every word she heard the preacher say at the funeral. All there was to say, really, engraved on her baby's headstone, dearly beloved. But what she got, settled for, was the one word that mattered. She thought it would be enough. Rutting among the headstones with the engraver, his young son looking on, the anger in his face so old, the appetite in it quite new. That should certainly be enough. Enough to answer one more preacher, one more abolitionist, and a town full of disgust. Counting on the stillness of her own soul, she had forgotten the other one, the soul of her baby girl. Who would have thought that a little old baby could harbor so much rage? Rutting among the stones under the eyes of the engraver's son was not enough. Not only did she have to live out her years in a house palsied by the baby's fury at having its throat cut, but those 10 minutes she spent pressed up against dawn-colored stone, studded with star chips, her knees wide open as the grave, were longer than life, more alive, more pulsating than the baby blood that soaked her fingers like oil. We could move, she suggested once to her mother-in-law. Oh, what be the point? Asked Baby Suggs. There's not a house in the country ain't packed to its rafters with some dead Negro's grief. We lucky this ghost is a baby. If my husband's spirit was to come back in here, or yours, don't talk to me, you lucky. You got 3 left, 3 pulling at your skirts and just 1 raising hell from the other side. Be thankful, why don't you? I had 8, every one of them gone away from me. 4 taken, 4 chased, and all I expect worrying somebody's house into evil. Baby Suggs rubbed her eyebrows. My firstborn, all I can remember of her is how she loved the burned bottom of bread. Can you beat that? 8 children, and that's all I remember. That's all you let yourself remember, Setha had told her. But she was down to 1 herself, 1 alive, that is, the boys chased off by the dead one, and her memory of Bugler was fading fast. Howard at least had a head shape nobody could forget. As for the rest, she worked hard to remember as close to nothing as was safe. Unfortunately, her brain was devious. She might be hurrying across a field, running practically, to get to the pump quickly and rinse the chamomile sap from her legs. Nothing else would be in her mind. The picture of the men coming to nurse her was as lifeless as the nerves in her back, where the skin buckled like a washboard. Nor was there the faintest scent of ink or the cherry gum and oak bark from which it was made. Nothing. Just the breeze cooling her face as she rushed toward water, and then sopping the chamomile away with pump water and rags, her mind fixed on getting every last bit of sap off, on her carelessness in taking a shortcut across the field just to save a half mile, and not noticing how high the weeds had grown until the itching was all the way to her knees. Then something, plash of water, the sight of her shoes and stockings awry on the path where she had flung them, or here boy lapping in the puddle near her feet. And suddenly there was Sweet Home, rolling, rolling, rolling out before her eyes, And although there was not a leaf on that farm that did not make her want to scream, it rolled itself out before her in shameless beauty. It never looked as terrible as it was, and it made her wonder if hell was a pretty place too. Fire and brimstone, all right, but hidden in lacy groves. Boys hanging from the most beautiful sycamores in the world. It shamed her, remembering the wonderful soughing trees rather than the boys. Try as she might to make it otherwise, the sycamores beat out the children every time, and she could not forgive her memory for that. When the last of the chamomile was gone, she went around to the front of the house collecting her shoes and stockings on the way. As if to punish her further for her terrible memory, sitting on the porch not 40 feet away was Paul D., the last of the Sweet Home men. And although she could never mistake his face for another's, she said, "Is that you?" "What's left?" He stood up and smiled. "How you been, girl, besides barefoot?" When she laughed, it came out loose and young. "I messed up my legs back yonder in the chamomile." He made a face as though tasting a teaspoon of something bitter. "I don't want to even hear about it. I always did hate that stuff." Setha balled up her stockings and jammed them into her pocket. "Come on in." "The porch is fine, Setha. It's cool out here." He sat back down and looked at the meadow on the other side of the road, knowing the eagerness he felt would be in his eyes. 18 years, she said softly. 18, he repeated, "and I swear I've been walking every one of them. Mind if I join you?" He nodded toward her feet and began unlacing his shoes. "You want to soak 'em? Let me get you a basin of water." She moved closer to him to enter the house. "No, can't. Baby feet. Whole lot more tramping they got to do yet." "You can't leave right away, Paul D. You got to stay a while." "Well, long enough to see baby Suggs anyway. Where is she?" "Dead." "Oh, no. When?" 8 years now, almost 9. "Was it hard?" "I hope she didn't die hard." Setha shook her head. "Soft as cream. Being alive was the hard part. Sorry you missed her, though. Is that what you came by for?" "Well, that's some of what I came by for. The rest is you. But if all the truth be known, I go anywhere these days, anywhere they let me sit down." "You're looking good." Devil's confusion. He lets me look good long as I feel bad. He looked at her, and the word bad took on another meaning. Setha smiled. This is the way they were, had been, all of the Sweet Home men. Before and after Hallie treated her to a mild, brotherly flirtation, so subtle you had to scratch for it. Except for a heap more hair and some waiting in his eyes, he looked the way he had in Kentucky, peach stone skin, straight back. For a man with an immobile face, it was amazing how ready it was to smile or blaze or be sorry with you, as though all he had to do was get his attention, and right away he produced the feeling you were feeling. With less than a blink, his face seemed to change. Underneath it lay the activity. I wouldn't have to ask about him, would I? You'd tell me if there was anything to tell, wouldn't you? Setha looked down at her feet and saw again the sycamores. "I'd tell you, sure I'd tell you. I don't know any more now than I did then." "You must think he's still alive." "No, I think he's dead. It's not being sure that keeps him alive." "Well, what did baby Suggs think?" "Same, but to listen to her, all her children is dead. Claims she felt each one go the very day and hour." "Well, when did she say Hallie went?" 1855, the day my baby was born." "You had that baby, did you? I never thought you'd make it." He chuckled. "Running off, pregnant." "Had to. Couldn't be no waiting." She lowered her head and thought, as he did, how unlikely it was that she had made it. And if it hadn't been for that girl looking for velvet, She never would have. All by yourself, too. He was proud of her and annoyed by her. Proud she had done it, annoyed that she had not needed Hallie or him in the doing. Almost by myself, not all by myself. A white girl helped me. Well, then she helped herself, too, God bless her. You could stay the night, Paul D. You don't sound too steady in the offer. Setha glanced beyond his shoulder toward the closed door. Oh, it's truly, men, I just hope you pardon my house. Come on in, talk to Denver while I cook you something. Paul D. tied his shoes together, hung them over his shoulder, and followed her through the door, straight into a pool of red and undulating light that locked him where he stood. You got company, he whispered, frowning. Off and on, said Setha. Good God. He backed out the door onto the porch. What kind of evil you got in here? It's not evil, it's just sad. Come on, just step through. He looked at her closely then, closer than he had when she first rounded the house on wet and shining legs, holding her shoes and stockings up in one hand, her skirts in the other. Hallie's girl, the one with the iron eyes and backbone to match. He'd never seen her hair in Kentucky. And though her face was 18 years older than when he last saw her, it was softer now because of the hair. A face too still for comfort. Irises the same color of her skin, which in that still face used to make him think of a mask with mercifully punched out eyes. Hallie's woman, pregnant every year. In 2 years she sat by the fire, telling him she was going to run. Her 3 children she had already packed into a wagon load of others in a caravan of Negroes crossing the river. They were to be left with Hallie's mother near Cincinnati. Even in that tiny shack, leaning so close to the fire you could smell the heat in her dress, her eyes did not pick up a flicker of light. They were like 2 wells into which he had trouble gazing. Even punched out, they needed to be covered, lidded, marked with some sign to warn folks of what that emptiness held. So he looked instead at the fire while she told him, because her husband was not there for the telling. Mr. Garner was dead, and his wife had a lump in her neck the size of a sweet potato and unable to speak to anyone. She leaned as close to the fire as her pregnant belly allowed and told him, Paul D., the last of the Sweet Home men. There had been 5 of them who belonged to the farm, Setha, the only female. Mrs. Garner, crying like a baby, had sold his brother to pay off the debts that surfaced the minute she was widowed. Then schoolteacher arrived to put things in order, but what he did broke 3 more Sweet Home men and punched the glittering iron out of Setha's eyes, leaving 2 open wells that did not reflect firelight. Now the iron was back, but the face, softened by hair, made him trust her enough to step inside her door, smack into a pool of pulsing red light. She was right. It was sad. Walking through it, a wave of grief soaked him so thoroughly he wanted to cry. It seemed a long way to the normal light surrounding the table, but he made it, dry-eyed and lucky. You said she died soft as cream, he reminded her. Oh, that's not baby Suggs, she said. Well, who then? My daughter. The one I sent ahead with the boys? She didn't live? No. The one I was carrying when I run away is all I got left. Boy's gone too. Both of them walked off just before baby Suggs died. Paul D. looked at the spot where the grief had soaked him. The red was gone, but a kind of weeping clung to the air where it had been. Probably best, he thought. If a Negro got legs, he ought to use them. Sit down too long, somebody will figure out a way to tie him up.